The first thing I'd like to do is acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge that these lands have always been places of learning, teaching and research. And it is fantastic to have you all with us today as we yarn and talk about a very important subject, which is, of course, wellbeing, and how we create amazing workplaces where we feel, where we're thriving. And so this is right on topic for what I love to learn about. And so I was absolutely delighted when Ben agreed to come and have a chat with us. He's up very early because it's definitely before 9 o'clock in his part of the world. So thank you, Ben, for joining us today. For those who want to know just a little bit about Tea and Buns, it's a monthly chat with anybody who would like to join us. So you're almost welcome. I usually get a great speaker to come and talk to us about their work or their research. And we get an opportunity to just talk about what they've been doing and their insights and practical tips. So things that we can take away as leaders and as just colleagues in the sector, wherever we're working. We want to really use research and use people's expertise to help us grow and thrive ourselves. So today you're all muted, but you're welcome if you have a question to come off mute while you ask a question, or you're all welcome to use the chat. I'm going to try and keep a little eye on the chat. So if you have a comment or you just want to put a conversation in the chat, you're very, very welcome. And of course, we're all going to use respect as we talk and learn together today. So thank you so much for coming. Now, I always love to start with just a little sort of thought-provoking moment. And today I thought it would be really good to just start off with a question for you. Have a look at this picture on the screen. This is of a lady who obviously is on a plane. Looks like she's on a plane. Oh gosh, who wants to be on a plane soon? I do. And she looks like she's happily busying herself reading. Now, I want to know, would you be her if you were on a plane? Would you be the person who perhaps is just focused on not interacting, or would you be the person who was thinking, right, I would really love to talk to this person? So first of all, I want to know, who would you be? Would you be the person choosing to just be in solitude, or would you be the person going, right, I really want to talk to her? I just put it in the chat for me. I'm interested to see which person you think you would be. Victoria, I want to talk to her. Crosswords hard to resist. I'd have a mask on. I'm a chatter. Okay. So first of all then, yeah, it's great to see, who would you be? Are you the person who's more sort of inclined to say, no, I just want to use this time for solitude, or do I want to chat? Now, if, however, there was a challenge on and I asked you to make sure that you did connect with this person, my second question is to you, how would you start engaging her in conversation? Put it in the chat. Have you got any really great icebreakers, conversation starters to spark up a conversation with a stranger? What would you do? What would you say? I'm very interested to know if any of you have got some really great, ways of breaking the ice. Do you come here often? I purposefully did not say chat up lines, but I pay a compliment. Great, complimenting something, you notice, yeah. I will tell you in a moment some research that's come out about this while you're still putting your icebreakers there, because I think it's really good to share some icebreakers. But I do want to tell you my own story, is that when I was young, I was backpacking around Australia. I'm actually from England, but I came backpacking around Australia, and I was on a bus and I sat next to a lady who actually looked very similar to this and was reading a magazine. And I nosily looked over and saw what she was reading. And I decided to strike up a conversation with her about the article that she was reading. And fortunately for me, she was nice to me and started chatting. Long story short, and if you want to know more about this, you'd have to email me. I ended up staying at her house and living and even going to her work for a few. I was a backpacker, and I actually ended up staying with her for a while and getting to know her family. And it's an amazing story of how I striked up this conversation with this lovely lady. But anyway, that can sometimes be the result of sometimes meeting strangers, can't it? So the research I want to show you about this and why it's important sometimes is because I read that there was a study done in 2014 around that time where people were about to board a train or a bus and were asked whether they'd enjoy interacting with a stranger during their commute. And so they were randomly assigned. They would start a conversation, they would sit quietly, or they would just do what they normally did. And they did some study after this, and they found that those who interacted with a stranger were happier, they enjoyed their commute more, they had more energy, and no drop in productivity, whether they expected to enjoy talking to a stranger or not. And I just really thought that was a very powerful study that shows us that we often underestimate this impact of talking to strangers. And of course, it's not just strangers, it's people in our workplace who we should know as well, or we might know. And I just thought that would be a really interesting study to tell you about, because that's going to lead into a little bit about what Ben's been researching. And so I thought that was great. Now, thank you so much for sharing all of your conversation starters. My husband's very, very good at starting conversations with strangers. And I just thought, never underestimate the power of that. Even if you feel a bit nervous or a little bit like they don't really want to talk to me, there could be some really positive impact on that person and obviously yourself as well. So that's my little get us going and thinking about, well-being and connecting with strangers. And I really want to thank Ben for coming along and sort of maybe expanding on this research a little bit and telling us a little bit about what he's doing. Ben, welcome. You are at the School of Business and Law at Edith Cowan University. So welcome, and thank you for getting up nice and early to come and speak with us today. You've been thinking about the impacts of stress, culture, sick leave and engagement on well-being in the workplace. And so that's what really got my interest when I read a little bit about your work and some of your papers and invited you to come along to Tea and Buns today. Of course, a lot of your work has been in many different organisations, so I know that what you're going to share with us is going to be equally important, whether we're from a university or whether we're from a private or a non-profit organisation. So thanks so much, Ben. Just to introduce yourself to us, tell me what interested you in this subject. How did you get to start researching these topics?
I think for a lot of people who find themselves working in not-for-profits, and I know I'm not speaking to everyone in that category, the answer is it was diverse life circumstances that led to this journey for me. I have a real passion. I should say I used to be a musician and I used to be a school teacher, and then I did my PhD on why musicians don't make any money and how they can be better, have better career outcomes. And that kind of led me to meet people who do human resource management research, and with my arts background and my passion for kind of making real music or making life music in different locations, I have ended up working with lots of really cool and much more talented colleagues than myself from a research perspective, but I've worked in such a breadth of organizations, and I'm really fortunate to have gleaned so much facts about how things happen in practice, from theory to practice. So I know that's not a really good or clear answer, but I think that's what I might strive for today, the opposite of clarity, some attempt of feelings, of imparting my feelings rather than imparting perfect language, and I'll get to why that is soon.
That's a fascinating background and pathway into this type of research. And so what I really want to talk to you then is what you found out. Because, you know, I think we can all acknowledge that wellbeing has been incredibly important to us in the last few years. Obviously, COVID has impacted on the way that we live our lives and we do our work in numerous ways. But even before that, and obviously you were studying this before COVID, you know, in terms of well-being and connection and stress and how that impacts on our lives. So it was very pertinent that you come along and speak to us today. Many of us around the country have been in lockdown for a long time. We're doing work from home. We are working in different ways and we are feeling the stress for many different reasons. So we're going to talk about the drivers of employee performance and what you found out today. But first of all, everybody's wondering, because I'm sure they are, what is this picture? Can you tell us what this is all about? And, you know, what's this picture?
Yeah, this is a neuron. We have 100 billion neurons in our brain, and we have 100 trillion connections. So our brain are a kind of amazing network of tiny little things that are all connected, and they're connected in different parts. There's different regions of our brain, and where a neuron sits will determine its likely function. But an amazing thing about the human brain is it not perfectly, but largely comes when you're a baby, when you're a fetus even, unprogrammed. We're a species that takes a long time to mature into adulthood, and even during adulthood, these neurons and the connections between them are growing. Yeah, so it's. I'll talk a little bit more as we go. I think about some of the chemicals that drive individual performance and collective performance, and maybe I'm segueing too much, but one of the problems is that we've really emphasized individual performance in our organizations, in the way that we manage employees and well-being, and it is to our detriment, because humans are fundamentally wired to be social beings. And actually, as you were pointing out, Ruth, on the plane, we derive joy. Little happy chemicals shoot off when we're meeting people, when we're talking to people, when we're hanging out with family, when we're hanging out with friends. And actually, these are drivers of workplace performance too.
That's great. And again, I think we could probably acknowledge intuitively, you know, that there is a need for us to connect. So what has your research been telling you then about this importance of connection and how it drives our work or our ability to do our work? You know, have you found any sort of really key insights about the importance of this connection and how we do it?
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm not a neuroscientist or a neuropsychologist. I am strictly a HR academic, but I could throw out two very boring words to you and I will. Motivation and teamwork. It's a quick way to make an audience fall asleep, because these are words that are bandied around that mean their connotation is too finite now. And so I've spent the last year kind of delving into human evolutionary history and the way that our brain works to understand why is motivation and teamwork, or perhaps redefine it, to understand what it is, particularly in the times of COVID, when connections occur via electronic means. If, Ruth, I could indulge a little bit of a story about our brains and say that we have, you know, at the moment in human history, we have cause for great optimism and hope about the future. We know so much, but I did want to say to each of you, unfortunately, you're not as smart as you think you are. And that's just a little bit of humility that's necessary, because I want to tell you one thing. We have this impression that Neanderthals, these are the pre-humans, humans that came before Homo sapiens, actually were smarter than humans. They had bigger brains. They were more adept at problem solving in their environment than humans were. But they did not have the same ability to process language. They did not have the same chemical wiring, potentially. Of course, it's hard to know because we have not found the synaptic connections of an intact brain. But from what we understand, they didn't connect like humans do. So what is it in our brain that actually means that there are no Neanderthals left around and there are billions of humans on the earth? Why have we been a successful species? At first, when only men were anthropologists, the answer was very clear. It's because humans are intrinsically wired for warfare, and that our language skills have developed so that we can coordinate armies and that we can go and fight each other. And it turns out that that's completely untrue. When we've had a more diverse anthropological cohort, people coming through and realize that actually most of the pre-humans and humans that we look at are females, and there is no evidence of warfare being a set basis for existence in the time. They realized that humans were actually better cooperating with each other than Neanderthals, that they could find clusters of human bones in valleys where there would only be a few Neanderthal bones, and that likely we lived alongside. Indeed, a human was born to a Neanderthal mother perhaps 100 million, or 100,000 years ago. Not such a long time. You could actually use the word grandfathers, or grandmothers, grandmother, and we'd only be here for a couple of minutes before you got to the very first human being. Okay, so
I have to interject and say that Leanne has made a very good point here. It sounds like you're saying we're lovers, not fighters.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly, we are much more naturally wired to being lovers than fighters. We do still have an animal component to our brain. It is for every bit of stimulus we get, if we look at a color, if we look at the sky, we see things, and there's little connections and fires that go through our head, and the first place it hits, the quickest pathway, is to our flight or fright response center in our brain. So everything is evaluated for whether it is to cause us fear or harm. However, that is our base, our base level. It's not necessarily a de-evolved state, but on top of this, human brains have developed far greater capability. Just another quick anecdote. I was mentioning that we believe that originally we believed that language was necessary for coordinating armies, in the same way that we might see killer whales hunt collectively. But the truth is, killer whales don't have the vocabulary that humans do. And what they've actually come to theorize is that our language development was not bred out of a need to coordinate armies and fight each other and other species, but rather to soothe our children. That our ability to be musical when we speak is a rhythmic and soothing pattern at its nature, and that the growth in the left hemisphere of our brain has actually existed to bring calm and comfort to each other and not harm.
But in the university, many students listen to beautiful music like operatic or classical music while they study. I'm sure, I don't know if you've done any into that, but I believe that having that classical music can actually help you study.
Yeah, certain musics can charge certain brain waves, and these brain waves can be really good for jumping into flow. And flow is that state where you don't get hungry and you don't get tired and you just feel completely motivated. And so certain music, certain body patterns and breathing techniques can quickly knock your brain into this optimal wave pattern.
Should we be singing more at work? Maybe there's a little experiment we could all do at work, start singing a bit more often.
Definitely. There was a great show on Conversations yesterday about a musical therapist. I ended up crying in the car. It was so beautiful. And she was talking about the need to start the day with a song, the need to connect with each other through songs. if it's okay, I wanted to just say one last thing about the chemicals of the brain, and this really centres on the final, I guess, background to what motivates us. In the brain, we've got different chemicals that are fired for every signal that we receive, and these chemicals exist at the base of each neuron. So we've got 100 billion neurons. We've got many of these chemical receptors around our brain. We have one of the most common receptors is called dopamine, and we know that as the kind of happy drug. It makes us happy. It gives us a really quick little shot of happiness for things that we like. In psychology, the dopamine receptor is called the reward pathway. And again, we can masculinize our organizations and think of many CEOs that stand up the front and tell us it's about setting goals and achieving goals. And once you set a goal, you can achieve a goal. And what you need is drive and motivation and setting goals and KPIs and et cetera, et cetera. This shoots feelings of happiness internally. This is exploited by organizations and managers for the last 140 years. We've had some knowledge of this, and we exploit. The truth is that there are two sorts of dopamine receptors. There is doing dopamine receptors. These are called D1 dopamine receptors, and indeed they are triggered when you achieve something. So if I say to everyone right now, solve this problem, 5 plus 5 in your head, and everyone it was easy enough. You all said 10, and you actually shot a little bit of dopamine through your head, and you're like, yes, I got that right. Good on you. But
no one's going to admit if they got it wrong, though. Yes, go on then.
This second dopamine isn't released by doing anything. It's released by being with people. It's also released while you're learning and thinking through things and being with people. And I always make this contrast. I've got a friend in the audience too, Ruth, who's Elizabeth, and she can attest. She's been to my family home for Christmas, and probably this is a story that's relatable. I have a big Italian family. They live down in Ormo. And when I go for Christmas, I find it a bit overwhelming. It's 30 people screaming and singing and hugging and fighting and all of these things. And I get even partially terrified before I rock up. But when I leave, I feel absolutely happy because I got to spend time with my family. And it wasn't until I started understanding these dopamine receptors that it made sense to me that actually I derived joy from being with them, even though I don't achieve anything. It doesn't make me a faster, a better, a stronger, or a more archetypal masculine CEO. It actually, it's just about this being, and this made sense to me. And I'll wrap up the story here because for years I've been wondering why people, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, aged carers rock up to their job every day. They get paid basically minimum wage to do what is a very physically hard and emotionally hard job. And me and my research team and I have researched this context a lot, looking at what are the management structures that drive people to rock up every day in these contexts when the pay is bad and the conditions are bad. And of course, they rock up for each other. And that's one of the most powerful things that even in corporate, high finance settings that I've also worked with and investigated, the deal's the same. A lot of the time, we're not rocking up for loads of individual reward. In this country, most of our wages are curbed by taxes anyway. We have a beautiful structure of Commonwealth which influences the way that we're taxed and the state of our streets and our buildings and our public transport. And for the most part, we're not rocking up for individual gain, but for collective gain. And my statement is, I think it's about time we don't just acknowledge this, but we celebrate it and we build our structures from it.
So Ben, are you saying then, because this is obviously very interesting, but it's wonderful news as well, that maybe the currency of our organisations is really built on the power of our relationships or the strength of our relationships, rather than obviously what other extrinsic rewards that we can gain as individuals. Should we be focusing more on that strength of relationships, and whether we have whether we're working remotely or not, how do we maintain those positive relationships and maybe ability to collectively problem solve, rather than, yes, worrying all the time about KPIs and other, as I said, extrinsic rewards. Is that what you're saying or suggesting?
Yeah, and I'd probably go further, that I'm at the point now where I'm querying whether we really need KPIs. I'm not resolved on that one yet, but I did have a strategic planner consultant come into our research centre 2 weeks ago, and they sat down with us and they said, it's about, setting the right KPIs for the goal. And I asked her a philosophical question, which is what you should not do to a consultant who's, they have a nice face, but they're charging by the hour and they have a lot to do, having done a lot of consultancy myself. And I said, do you really think KPIs are the goal for our centre is called the Centre for Work and Wellbeing. And we're really driven by this spirit of trying to make everything and everyone happier. And that doesn't fit nicely into a measurable KPI. Anyway, her answer was yes, it's just about finding the right KPI. But I had to acknowledge that I asked that question, and it's been buzzing around my head for a long time since, that is there a way, to do this? So are individual KPIs for aged care workers getting in the way of them having a more valuable experience at work? And the answer is probably. Hopefully the Aged Care Royal Commission doesn't lead to more measuring of minutes with people, which would very much be the temptation, but rather that we abandon that and do take what did come out of the Royal Commission, which is resident-centred care. That if we could adopt that as the KPI, which is impossible to measure, but absolutely apparent when you see it. That's the go. That's the way forward.
So maybe it's about reframing the KPI, or even not focusing on those KPIs that actually give us stress and, make us feel like we're inadequate, but focus on the KPIs that are around connection and support and productivity that boosts us and encourages us and creates those stronger connections, and using empathy in our work and using that, which is why I think I have a little excitement around human-centered design and how we use design thinking, which starts with empathy. So if we started and had our first and primary KPI is how are we showing empathy to each other and our clients, maybe that would give us a first, good grounding there.
Yeah, definitely. And it's probably, the time to bring up that we're not going to get rid of KPIs tomorrow, and we're probably not going to get better at KPIs tomorrow, even shifting it to different areas of, from the output to the input. There are strengths and weaknesses, and as a data-driven person myself, I like a good graph. A graph can tell you where your organization is heading. So this might sound like a counterfactual statement that I'm making, but I would now draw to the power of managers in translating KPIs and in having the autonomy to say upwards, hey, that was the wrong KPI. Here's the data, that was the wrong KPI. And saying downwards to employees, hey, this one isn't important, or this is important, and this is what you're focusing on. All right, that seems very simplistic. And if that was all a manager does, and indeed that's all we've expected from managers for a very long time, we've got a huge problem. Where we've spent a lot of time over the pandemic and its subsequent lockdowns around Australia is doing a lot of research with managers and employees, particularly in New South Wales, and our research was funded by the Centre of Work Health and Safety in New South Wales. It's a body of safe work, so it was all about risk mitigation, mental health, and safety in the workplace. And we surveyed thousands of people. We did interviews after interviews and focus groups. And the power of the manager in either making a horrible work from home experience or a really transformational and productive one really shone through. And a quick statistic, this was before the pandemic, we know that 80% of people would take a substantial pay cut so that their manager got fired. We also know that people don't leave organisations, they leave their managers.
Yeah.
And this role then is changing from one which is just about, again, the traditional notion, hey, you're a high performer, we're going to promote you to manager. What we want you to do is recreate yourself in the staff. That leads to uniform organisations. It leads to single gender, single race organisations. It leads to a lack of diversity. It leads to bad ideas being replicated. Hey, it leads to half of the Liberal Party, if we were to be honest. It leads to conservative decision making. It lets go of innovation. And it's wrong. It's not good. It's not going to drive performance into the future. What we need is the opposite, diverse managers, and managers that are given the remit to listen. A few people have noted this, listen, to empathize, to make sense of what's going on in everybody's circumstance, to be skilled at requesting more from one than another, and then inverting that when times are different, to champion new ideas that come up from the line and recognise those who gave those ideas. A final stat just to finish off, or to throw back to you, Ruth, is that 2% of people in the general population are diagnosed with narcissism, and 10% of managers have narcissism. And so what I'm trying to draw here is that the manager class that we have is actually not the manager class that we need if we want to drive mentally healthy workplaces and productive and innovative workplaces.
Yeah. If anybody, Fran, and anybody wants to know any of this research, just send me an email and I'll see if I can send you some of the links. And I do want to pick up on one paper, which I will send to everybody and I'll put on the blog afterwards, is about your paper around austerity. Hang on, I've got the details here. It's austerity in aged care and resources. And you've linked the idea that compassion is a really important attribute of an organisation. So can you tell me then, you've been talking about these attributes of a leader and what does a manager need to do? Is compassion one of the attributes that you have found motivates and drives people within an organisation?
Yeah, probably the answer is yes. And I would say that my soiree with compassion was led with a buddy of mine called Ace Simpson. Ace, like me, grew up in Queensland, and he's now living in London. He's at Brunel University. He's quite fancy and prestigious, but he's just a down-to-earth guy that likes yoga.
From Queensland.
Yeah, you can't knock it out. I remember we had a whole bunch of international, we were both in Sydney for 5 years at UTS, and we had a bunch of international people, and one of my international mates from Pakistan came and said, "Hey, where's Ace from? I can't tell his accent." I said, "That's a true blue Queenslander right there." Okay, Ace did his research following the Brisbane floods, where he was looking at organisations and how they responded with people having to take time off work to fix their house, having to go and quickly tend to a flood that's occurring to them or their neighbour. And also the people that kept up on rocking up to work, even though their house had been destroyed by the floods. They were there to provide an essential service for the greater good. And from his research came a much more detailed understanding of empathy. So empathy has been mentioned a few times in today's session. And can I say, actually, there's a few problems with empathy. Empathy leads to us finding affinity with those doing wrong. Empathy by itself, we can empathize with a bully. We say, oh, they've had a terrible childhood and they're a senior manager and they're just trying their best. And sure, they've got these bad narcissistic traits and they're toxic, but come on, let's think about it more broadly. This is the empathetic emotion in humans by itself can be problematic because I've given the worst scenario, but of course there's lots of good things that it does. What compassion does is compartmentalize empathy in a process, and that process is first recognizing that there's suffering in workplaces, that people might be struggling, empathizing with it, feeling that feeling with the person suffering, but not stopping there, making sense of it. What's the broader context? Are they at fault? Is this a life lesson that they need to go through? And the final one is responding, making an action of response to alleviate the suffering, but noticing that that's not necessarily being and sitting in the pain with the person, but helping them resolve that. When those things occur, what happens is a transformation in the person that was suffering. They work harder. They feel connected to a workplace and their colleagues because of the gratitude and the love that was shown to them. And this drives them to work harder. This drops down turnover over time. It ramps up productivity and effective commitment in my human resource management language. So it's very powerful in this regard. What we've also looked at is some of the wicked problems that exist in workplaces and how compassion can be used there. So one thing that we can't get rid of, and I've been researching this for 15 years, is workplace bullying. I mentioned that we have entrenched narcissists in our managerial class, and often bullying occurs because of those managers. But equally, a lot of my research with my colleagues is looking that the public sector and the not-for-profit sector has continually experienced funding cuts. It's always resource poor. It always has ambitions that extend beyond the resources provided to it.
Yeah.
In the face of a poor manager, what happens to them is they're given an unachievable KPI, and instead of relaxing and listening and talking to their staff, they bully them. They coerce them into achieving that KPI. Aged care staff, I need you to do, your whole rounds. You got 6 minutes per patient yesterday. Today, we're doing it in 5 because we're down a staff member and I can't pay to get a new one in. So that's what's happening. 5 minutes, go. And that's pressure. And that's not effective, and that turns into a feeling of discontent over time. That turns into bullying. And what we've been looking at is compassion, because we can't resolve this yet. No amount of workplace training or bullying investigation has ever resolved bullying. We often just make a victim feel, we do victim blaming, we make the situation slightly better for a small amount of time, but it can it can revert. That compassion is a powerful response to bullying. And what we've looked at is healthcare teams. When we have a manager bully come in and tell a whole bunch of nurses or a whole bunch of allied health staff that, you're doing the wrong thing, you're a bunch of idiots, go away, achieve this, I don't want to hear about it. And when those staff, those employees get together and say, hey, our manager's an idiot, don't listen, he's off with the fairies, that has a very powerful effect in mitigating the harmful impact of bullying. That actually, when we looked at compassion as a moderator in this context, when compassion was present, the effect on well-being stayed the same. That bully didn't have an effect on well-being. That's powerful.
So is that another reason why we should be making sure that people are feeling connected and safe in our organisations? Should we be asking each other more, how you going? How you feeling? Are you okay? Should we be asking those questions more often, do you think?
I mean, it depends on your context. I think in really great organizations that exists from the get-go, and it's, you know, people before products or people before purpose, and those are just words. But when when I've rocked into certain organizations, I work a lot with the Tasmanian Department of Police, and they're going through a whole transformation at the moment towards a well-being oriented culture. And I've got to say, it looks like a great place to work. It's not without its challenges, but they, in 1977, they had one psychologist charged with the well-being of 600 police officers. In 2017, they had a team of 6 in charge of nearly 1,200 officers. Now they got basically 2,000 officers, and they've got 27 staff. Basically, they've ramped up the number of staff involved in making it a well-being oriented workplace. And you can see this top-down, bottom-up effect of people checking in with each other, of people feeling more comfortable to report to their manager that the trauma that they saw today at this car crash or at this domestic violence situation is sitting with them, and that they would like to talk it through with people. They would like to have that suffering alleviated. And it's quite a beautiful transformation that I get to observe over time in that workplace. But many of our workplaces know this and use it to drive performance outcomes. But most of them don't. And yeah, I guess today is about.
It's really elevating well-being. It's understanding that being overt about well-being and being, very overt about saying, how are you going? Do you need support? Shall we talk? How can we support you? That has real impact on performance and engagement, and probably reduces turnover. I would imagine that when people feel that it's okay to talk about their well-being and that they will be supported, they're less likely then to go off and search for other workplaces that might support them better. Are you looking into that at all? Or is that what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem with well-being is it's often considered, someone's put here a checkbox in the chat. It's often considered the output, particularly when we work with organisations when they're just at a nascent stage of understanding well-being. They think that well-being is like, a person performs and they have well-being. This might sound, again, counterintuitive, but what I like to say is that the best measure is performance, and we want to measure well-being along the way. Well-being leads to performance. Why? Again, that sounds a bit counterintuitive. Many organizations think by providing a fruit bowl once a week and a relaxation chair and having dogs come and visit people at work is going to transform their workplace culture to a well-being oriented one. And I guess that's what I would like to steer away from. That stuff does little to curb, if you're in a bullying heavy, KPI driven organization that's not connected internally, and you chuck in a few happy dogs to go through the hallways, the transformation, the effect on performance, the effect on retention is going to be very minimal. If instead you adopt a more bottom-up and top-down holistic social approach to well-being, looking at the connections between teams, changing culture, changing your priority at the senior and at all levels of the organisation towards a well-being conducive workplace, that's what's transformational. And from that might come puppy dogs running down the hallway, but the puppy dogs themselves have little effect. That's more of a celebration, a cherry on top of a well-built well-being environment.
And I've got one more question before I kind of ask you to wrap up with some real practical tips for us. But I really have been, searching for this answer for many years, and I'd just like your insights on it. why do we tend to, in the non-profit sector, in healthcare sector specifically, why do we tend to be so focused on the well-being of our clients, yet it seems like we don't prioritise our own well-being? What is that? Why do we tend to feel that we can, be so caring towards others, but then we don't look after our own well-being? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, but it's not a happy thought. I would like to, acknowledge that most of our not-for-profits really come from a tradition of benevolent care through religious organisations, and that's not just Christian organisations. We can look back from the 1600s. Many of you would know Vivaldi. Vivaldi, you might hear the classical piece Summer or Spring. This guy was employed by the Catholic Church to train orphans in music. That was in the 1600s. That was the not-for-profits that existed at the time. But herein lies the problem, where the background of the not-for-profit sector is a legacy of patriarchal dominance, of held power structures that don't permeate to the masses, but are held by a small few. And it's hard, and as part of that, there was one's duty is to service the church of the time, and again that permeates across most religions. This is a hard one to shake. We're asked to go above and beyond, but not in the spirit of our well-being, not in a way. So for those not-for-profits who've been able to separate themselves sufficiently from a benevolent structure, they know that they can drive a lot from their volunteers by not paying them. And indeed, by offering them payment, it devalues what they're doing. But still, in many church-centered structures or not-for-profits that are more aligned to a traditional benevolent model, there's still a sense that we can't pay you completely for the good that you do, so we'll just give you a portion that makes you, roughly at the poverty line or slightly above minimum wage. And that's been allowed to propagate because of, in my opinion, these legacy issues. I think there's philosophers that talk about this too, such as Weber and others. But we need to shake these patriarchal structures entirely, and we need some leadership in that regard too. But we need to stop accepting that we do work for free when it shouldn't be done for free, and we need to celebrate when people are driven to do volunteer work for free, and not try and thwart that motive with tokenistic payment or say that that's the new structure for the whole economy.
Yes, and I'm loving all the chat. That's really getting everybody going now, because I think there are so many factors involved and so many thoughts about this, and it's great to see the discussion happening. Ben, we've just got a couple of minutes left. So what would you like us to take away from this today? What could we do to start increasing the well-being of our team and our organisation? What would you say was probably the place to start, or at least review our organisation's culture and say, are you doing this? Or are you, what could we take away from what you've been researching and say, yes, that's how we could improve the well-being in our organisation?
Awesome. I have two very, very simple and practical things. And the first one is to have more coffee. And that is that taking half an hour to go and have coffee with your colleagues, with your subordinates, with your friends, is probably an hour of productivity gained, rather than half an hour away from email.
You heard it here, everybody. Go have more coffee because it actually improves productivity. Okay, thanks, Ben. We don't need anything more. No, just joking. Great. We'll all take that one. What's your other tip, Ben?
The other one is that little time in every Zoom call at the start where we're checking in on each other. Don't stop that. Don't jump straight down to business, particularly if you've got people who are isolated that haven't seen a few people for a few days. By stopping that connection, you're stopping the productivity. So you need the social element first that's what's going to drive the innovation and the safety and the innovative contribution.
Yeah. And I do believe that we do need to be intentional about it, because as you say, it just slips off the agenda. We kind of like, we make it an important thing about checking in with each other wellbeing wise for a while, but then it seems to just sort of slip down or slip off the agenda completely. And I've noticed that across the university is that, yes, we tend to just rush into meetings and we're quick, and we don't always like Zoom now. We're on Zoom for so much. We want to get off it as quick as possible. But that means that there isn't any time to just check in with each other. I want to give a tip to, we'll come back then. I just wanted to slip in there one of my ways that, and if you've been on a call with me before, you may have heard this, that a very simple way to check in with people is ask them to state what colour they're feeling. So let's try this. What colour are you feeling right now? Put it in the chat box. And it could be good or bad. It doesn't mean anything, but you can just then be curious with people about the colour that they're feeling. So Ben's feeling a blue. So you might say, tell us about the blue, Ben. Is that, and that's how you kind of, great, I love it, because we've got yellow and pink and orange, right? And so it's about connecting and being mindful with how you're feeling, but then using that as a way to explore with people, what does that mean? So Debbie, you're feeling orange, what does that mean? And are you happy that you're orange, or is that a kind of orange that you hope you're not going to be tomorrow, So I just find that that's a really simple way, and I often ask my students that, but also my colleagues that when we start a meeting, just as a way to get talking about well-being. But that was my tip. What have you got? One last one, Ben?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Ruth. I just wanted to make one clarification, and that is what I was saying before about religious institutions and some of the challenges. I would just like to disclose that I've worked with some really great not-for-profit religious organisations too, and indeed many of them, have their people's hearts in mind. Not all of them, but certainly there are some really great and well-being centric religious run not-for-profits.
Thank you. Yes. And again, I think for me, compassion is one of those words that can be very religiousized, or whatever that word is, okay, but it can be very connotation with religion, but in actual fact it's a human attribute that we all connect with, that compassion is something that we need, and it is something that we need to give as well. And I love it if we're going to make that word sexy again, because I really do think that compassion is just a beautiful way of connecting with people and understanding where we're at any given time, given a myriad of things that life is throwing at us, whether it's our health or work or just what's going on in terms of our lives at the moment. So thank you so much, Ben, for just having this conversation with us and really encouraging us again to think about our own organisations and teams and what we're doing to improve well-being and the importance of that. Obviously, it's not just fluffy. It's not just a kind of, well, we'll do it if we get time. It's really connected to how well we create impact and how we work with our organisations and our clients and our community. So thank you so much for that. Is there any further questions for Ben before we wrap up? Fantastic. I think, everybody has really been motivated by this today, Ben. Thank you so much. So in closing then, I really just wanted to let you all know that there is one more tea and buns for this year, and it's going to be on Friday the 26th of November, and we're going to be chatting with Julia Keedy from the X Factor Collective, and we're going to be talking about social entrepreneurship. Now please don't think that you can't come if you're not a social entrepreneur. I believe that we all are we're all hidden maybe sometimes social entrepreneurs, and we need to really discuss what that is and how we can use that to benefit our own teams and organisations. So please feel free to come along to the next Tea and Buns, and then also please feel free to email me if there's any other topics such as wellbeing or resilience or anything else that you're challenged with in your organisations that you'd like to hear a conversation about, or a researcher that might have been doing some research in this area, please just email me and let me know what you'd like us to focus on. So thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us. It's fantastic that you've all turned up on a Friday morning. I hope that you have a wonderful day. Please take care of yourselves. Look after yourselves in this last few months of what has been a very challenging year for all of us. Take care of yourselves, take care of your team, and thank you, Ben, for promoting the importance of good culture, you know, that positive, compassionate culture where we can feel safe to talk about our well-being, etc. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Ben. I'm going to let you go and see you next time.